Brenton Harrison Tarrant, you have pleaded guilty to 51 charges of murder and 40 charges of attempted murder and 1 charge of engaging in a terrorist act.
Mr. Tarrant, you represent yourself in this proceeding?
The defendant is a 29-year-old Australian citizen who arrived in New Zealand in 2017 and resided in Dunedin. Between December 2017 and March 2019, the defendant purchased a collection of high-powered firearms, military specification sighting systems and telescopic sights. The defendant also purchased in excess of 7,000 rounds of ammunition of various calibres for the firearms. While obtaining and practising with these weapons, the defendant began to formulate a plan to carry out attacks on mosques and to inflict as many fatalities as possible. He obtained a large amount of information about mosques in New Zealand, predominantly within the South Island. The information he obtained from the internet included detailed mosque plans, interior pictures of the mosques, mosque locations, and specific details such as prayer times and important days in the Islamic calendar to ascertain when the mosques would be at their busiest. On the morning of Friday, 15 March 2019, the defendant left his address in Dunedin and drove north to Christchurch. In the vehicle were firearms, a large amount of ammunition preloaded into magazines, and 4 modified petrol containers intended for use as incendiary devices. The defendant's intention was to burn down the mosques at the conclusion of the attacks. The defendant travelled along State Highway 1 and arrived in the outskirts of Christchurch at 12:55 p.m. The defendant parked in a car park close to the Al-Noor Mosque. The main prayer room is a large open-plan room with few exits. At this time there were in excess of 120 worshippers present. The defendant turned to his right and fired 32 shots from his AR-15 into the mass of people in the north-eastern corner of the room. The rate of fire was extremely high, and the defendant moved the AR-15 across and back many times. The defendant walked back into the main prayer room, stood in the centre of the room, and continued to shoot deliberately at persons lying prone or attempting to escape. He walked back along the hallway of the mosque and out of the front exit. As he did so, he checked prone victims to ensure they'd been killed. He retrieved a magazine, he dropped and reloaded his weapon. After leaving the Al-Noor Mosque, the defendant selected the next destination in his vehicle's GPS unit. He then turned into the driveway of the Linwood Islamic Centre and Linwood Avenue. The defendant walked into the entrance of the mosque and turned to his left. There he fired a further 3 aimed shots. The defendant raised and fired the AR-15 a further 4 times. The defendant turned the weapon again to his left and fired a further 2 times at worshippers before it ran out of ammunition. He dropped the weapon, turned around and ran back to the Subaru. The defendant then drove east along Linwood Avenue before turning right into Aldwins Road and right onto Brougham Street. At this point, police officers were able to ram the defendant's vehicle with a police car. The defendant was then arrested. He did not offer resistance to the arrest. 51 people were killed as a direct result of the attacks, including women, men and children. 40 people suffered gunshot wounds ranging in severity, a significant number of whom required surgery. Some will suffer lifelong physical effects.